The security guard's grip tightened on Amara's upper arm, his fingers digging into the soft wool of her thrift store blazer. Minho Park stood over her, his face a mottled shade of violet, a single bead of sweat trickling into his perfectly groomed jawline. He grabbed the cardboard box from her desk and upended it. A cracked ceramic mug, a handful of cheap ballpoint pens, and a framed, blurry photo of an old man in a hospital bed clattered onto the floor. The glass in the frame shattered, a jagged crack bisecting the old man's face. "You're fired." Minho's voice cracked, echoing off the glass partitions of the open-plan office. "Get this gutter rat out of my building." Now, Amara didn't beg. She didn't cry. Her jaw locked, so tight the muscles in her neck stood out like cords. She looked down at the shattered photo. The man in the frame was Sang-woo Park, the founder of Park Global, the man whose name was etched in 30-foot steel letters on the roof of this very skyscraper. To the world, he was a recluse hiding in a private villa. To Minho, he was a paycheck. To Amara, he was the father who had taught her how to tie her shoes before the world turned cold. She reached down to grab the broken frame, but Minho stepped on it, the heel of his $1,000 Italian loafers grinding the glass into the carpet. "I said get out," Minho hissed, leaning in so close she could smell the expensive scotch and the rot of a man who thought he was king. Amara looked up at him. She didn't see a boss. She saw a squatter. Her father's empire was a carcass, and Minho was the lead vulture. As the guards dragged her toward the elevators, the 100 employees of the floor stared. Some looked away. Others smirked. None of them knew that the girl in the scuffed shoes held a secret that would burn the building to the ground. This moment, the humiliation, the glass under Minho's shoe, the cold metal of the elevator doors closing, was the finish line of a 6-month marathon. Amara hadn't come to Park Global for a paycheck. She had come for blood. For months, she had lived on ramen and coffee, working 12-hour shifts as a junior data entry clerk, all to get close enough to the servers to find out where they were hiding her father. Sang-woo Park hadn't retired. He had been disappeared. And as Amara stood in the rain outside the lobby, her box of ruined belongings turning into a soggy mess in her arms, she realized Minho hadn't just fired an employee. He had untethered a ghost. The mystery of Sang-woo's disappearance was locked behind a firewall she no longer had access to, but the fire in her chest was worth more than any password. Amara walked 3 blocks to a cramped apartment above a laundromat. Her home didn't have a view of the city. It had a view of a brick wall and a rusted fire escape. She set the soggy box on her kitchen table, a crate she'd found in the alley, and pulled out a hidden compartment in the bottom. Inside was a sleek, black encrypted tablet. She had spent every night for half a year mapping the company's internal architecture. She knew which accounts Minho used to funnel consulting fees to offshore shells. She knew which board members were being blackmailed. But she needed the master key, the biometric override that only the Park bloodline could trigger. The goal was simple: get back inside, reach the executive penthouse, and trigger the inheritance protocol her father had coded into the building's core decades ago. If she could prove she was alive and present, the entire system would lock Minho out and return control to her. But the stakes had just tripled. Minho was moving the vote for the merger to tomorrow morning. If the merger went through, Park Global would be dissolved, the assets stripped, and her father's trail would go cold forever. A notification blinked on her tablet. A message from the ghost, an anonymous contact within IT she'd been cultivating. Park just moved the target. Sang-woo is being moved to the long-term care facility in the mountains tonight at 2 a.m. If he leaves the building, you'll never find him. Amara's pulse hammered against her ribs. She didn't have a team. She didn't have money. All she had was a janitor's uniform she'd stolen 3 weeks ago and a map of the ventilation shafts. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen of the tablet. Her eyes weren't those of a victim anymore. They were the eyes of a predator. The service entrance of the Park Global building smelled of industrial bleach and wet concrete. Amara pulled the brim of her cap lower, the heavy canvas of the janitor's jumpsuit chafing against her skin. She carried a mop bucket, the plastic wheels squeaking with a rhythmic, agonizing protest. Two security guards stood by the freight elevator, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. "Late shift?" one asked, his eyes roaming over her form. Amara didn't speak. She just gestured to the overflowing trash can near the loading dock and nodded. She kept her head down, her heart a frantic bird trapped in a cage. If they asked for her ID, she was dead. Her old badge had been deactivated the second Minho kicked her out. "Go on," the guard sighed, bored. "Park's got the whole place on lockdown for the move. Just stay out of the way." The elevator door slid shut. Amara hit the button for the 42nd floor, the server hub. The elevator groaned as it ascended. Every second felt like an hour. She checked her watch. 1:15 a.m. The doors opened to a dark hallway lit only by the blue flicker of server racks. Amara ditched the mop bucket and pulled a small electronic device from her pocket, a signal jammer. She had 90 seconds before the internal sensors noticed the dead zone. She sprinted toward the central hub, her sneakers silent on the raised floor panels. She reached the main terminal. This was it, the point of no return. She pressed her thumb against the biometric scanner. Access denied. Identity unknown. Amara froze. The scanner flickered red. She tried again, pressing harder. Access denied. Alerting security. A siren began to wail, a low, guttural pulse that vibrated in her very marrow. Red lights began to spin in the hallway. She had been betrayed. The ghost hadn't been an ally. He had been a trap. Through the glass wall of the server room, she saw the far door burst open. Minho Park stepped through, flanked by 4 armed men. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket anymore. He wore a tactical vest, and in his hand, he held a silenced pistol. He wasn't smiling. He looked bored. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Amara?" he asked, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. "Did you think I wouldn't recognize Sang-woo's eyes? If you believe Amara deserved better than to be walked into a trap by the people she trusted, hit the like button so her story reaches someone who needs to hear it." Minho walked toward the glass, the muzzle of the gun leveled at Amara's chest. The red emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows across his face. "Your father was a genius, Amara. Truly. But he was sentimental," Minho said, his voice a low crawl. "He built a kingdom and thought he could protect it with bloodlines. But blood is just a liquid. It spills. It dries. It's easily replaced." Amara backed away from the terminal, her hands raised. Her mind was racing. She looked at the server racks behind her. High-voltage cables snaked along the ceiling. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her knees. "He's exactly where he needs to be to sign the final papers," Minho replied. "And you? You're the tragic accident that justifies his sudden decline. A distraught daughter, a break-in, a tragic fall from the 42nd floor. The headlines practically write themselves." Minho nodded to his guards. 2 of them stepped forward, reaching for the heavy glass door. Amara didn't wait. She grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it with everything she had, not at the guards, but at the cooling pipe overhead. The pipe hissed and exploded. A cloud of pressurized liquid nitrogen erupted, filling the room with a blinding white fog. The temperature plummeted instantly. The guards screamed, shielding their eyes as the cryogenic mist bit into their skin. Amara didn't look back. She dove into the fog, moving by memory. She knew the layout of the server room better than Minho ever would. She crawled under the floor panels, feeling for the emergency manual override her father had told her about when she was a child. The lifeboat. "Find her!" Minho roared, the sound muffled by the roar of the escaping nitrogen. Amara's fingers found a cold iron ring beneath the floor. She pulled. A heavy trapdoor swung open, leading to the maintenance crawlspace. She slipped inside just as a bullet shattered the glass where her head had been a second before. The crawlspace was a tomb of dust and wires. Amara dragged herself through the dark, her lungs burning. She could hear the guards above her, their heavy boots thumping against the floorboards. "She's in the vents," someone yelled. Amara pushed forward, her elbows raw and bleeding. She wasn't just escaping. She was hunting. The crawlspace led to the executive elevator shaft. If she could reach the penthouse before Minho, she could still trigger the protocol. She reached the shaft and looked up. The penthouse was 12 floors above. The cables hung like thick, greasy vines in the abyss. She took a deep breath, gripped the cable, and began to climb. Each pull was a battle against gravity. Her muscles screamed. The grease on the cables made her grip slip, her heart jumping into her throat every time she slid a few inches back. Below her, she saw the lights of a second elevator car rising. They were coming for her. She reached the 54th floor, the penthouse, and kicked the emergency hatch open. She tumbled onto the plush carpet of her father's office. The room was silent, smelling of old books and mahogany. In the center of the room sat a high-backed leather chair, turned toward the window. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The chair slowly rotated. It wasn't Sang-woo Park. It was a mannequin, dressed in her father's favorite charcoal suit. Taped to its face was a single Polaroid photo. Amara approached it, her legs shaking. She picked up the photo. It was her father, thin and pale, sitting in a wheelchair. In his hand, he held a newspaper with today's date. But it wasn't the location that broke her heart. It was the background. Through the window in the photo, she could see a very specific landmark, the rusted water tower of the old textile mill. He wasn't in the mountains. He was in the basement of this very building. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The ghost hadn't just lured her into a trap. He had sent her in the wrong direction entirely. She had climbed 12 floors up, while her father was 50 floors down. Suddenly, the office doors swung open. Minho stood there, breathing hard, his face twisted in a mask of pure hatred. "Enough games," he said. He raised the gun. The bullet grazed Amara's shoulder, tearing through the jumpsuit and leaving a trail of fire. She dove behind the mahogany desk, the heavy wood splintering as Minho fired again and again. "You're just like him," Minho screamed. "Too much heart, not enough steel. You think you can save him? He doesn't even know who you are anymore." Amara reached under the desk. Her father had always kept a rainy day drawer. Her fingers brushed against a hidden latch. It clicked. A small, velvet-lined compartment slid out. Inside wasn't a gun. It was a vintage gold pocket watch. She grabbed it. It was the watch her father had carried for 40 years. She pressed the crown 3 times. A hidden screen in the desk's surface flickered to life. A voice, Sang-woo's voice, recorded years ago, filled the room. "If you are hearing this, Amara, then the shadows have finally reached the door. Do not be afraid. The house is yours. Always." The room began to shake. A low hum emanated from the walls. The inheritance protocol wasn't just a digital lockout. It was a physical one. Steel shutters slammed down over the windows and doors. The lights turned a brilliant, blinding white. Minho panicked, firing blindly at the shutters. "What is this? Stop this." "It's over, Minho," Amara said, standing up from behind the desk. She wasn't hiding anymore. "The building is in lockdown. No one gets in. No one gets out. Not until the police arrive." Minho laughed, a jagged, desperate sound. "The police? I own the police. Who do you think is going to believe a fired clerk over the CEO of Park Global?" "I'm not a clerk," Amara said, her voice dropping an octave. "And you're not the CEO." She held up the pocket watch. A small camera on the desk scanned the gold casing. "Master key accepted. Initializing global broadcast." Every screen in the building, every monitor in the city's park kiosks, and every television in the lobby suddenly switched to a single feed, the office. "The world is watching, Minho," Amara whispered. "Say hello to the shareholders." Minho froze. He looked at the camera, then back at Amara. The gun in his hand felt very heavy. He could hear the sirens in the distance, real sirens this time. If this story broke your heart the way it broke mine, leave a like so I know to tell more stories like this. The police didn't come through the front door. They came through the roof. Amara sat on the floor of the penthouse, her shoulder bleeding, as tactical teams swarmed the room. Minho was on his knees, his hands behind his head, his face pressed into the carpet he had once walked on with such pride. "Where is he?" Amara grabbed a passing officer's arm. "The basement. The old archives. He's there." They found Sangwoo Park in a room that had once been a vault. He was sitting in his wheelchair, staring at a blank wall. He looked so small, a ghost of the giant she remembered. Amara knelt beside him. She took his hand. It was cold, like parchment. "Dad?" she whispered. Sangwoo slowly turned his head. His eyes wandered, unfocused, until they landed on her face. For a long second, there was nothing. No recognition. No spark. Amara's heart felt like it was being crushed by a giant hand. Then, his fingers twitched. He squeezed her hand back. "Amara," his voice was a dry rasp. "You're late for dinner." She sobbed, burying her face in his lap. The empire was hers. The building was secure. But as she sat in the cold basement, surrounded by the debris of a corporate war, she realized the victory was hollow. Her father was back, but he was fading. She looked up at the officers. "Take him to the hospital. Now." As they wheeled him away, Amara stood in the center of the vault. She saw a small leather-bound book on the table where her father had been sitting. She opened it. It was a diary. The last entry was dated yesterday. "They think I've forgotten. They think I'm broken. But I know she's coming. I can hear her in the vents. My little bird. I just hope I can stay long enough to say goodbye." Amara closed the book. She walked out of the vault, her head held high. She had a company to rebuild. She had a father to save. And she had a message for every vulture still circling the park name. The boardroom was silent. The 13 directors sat around the mahogany table, their faces pale. Minho Park's chair at the head of the table was empty. Amara walked in. She wasn't wearing a thrift store blazer anymore. She wore a tailored black suit. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like a park. She didn't sit down. She stood at the head of the table and looked at each of them. As of 6 o'clock this morning, Minho Park has been charged with kidnapping, corporate fraud, and attempted murder, Amara said. Her voice didn't shake. The merger is canceled. The board is being restructured. Effective immediately. A man at the end of the table, the CFO, cleared his throat. "Now, see here, Mississippi Park. You can't just..." Amara slammed a thick folder onto the table. "That folder contains the logs of every offshore transaction you've authorized in the last 3 years. You have 10 minutes to sign your resignation and leave the building before the authorities arrive to collect you." The man's face went gray. He stood up, his chair screeching against the floor, and walked out without a word. One by one, Amara looked at the others. 3 more stood and followed the CFO. The remaining 9 stayed, their heads bowed. "Good," Amara said. "Now, let's talk about the future." Months later, Amara stood on the balcony of the penthouse. The city stretched out below her, a sea of lights. The steel letters of Park Global glowed bright above her head. The door behind her opened. A nurse pushed a wheelchair onto the balcony. Sangwoo Park looked out at the city he had built. He looked stronger, his eyes clearer. "It's a long way down, isn't it?" Sangwoo asked. "We're not looking down anymore, Dad," Amara said, leaning against the railing. Sangwoo reached into his pocket and pulled out the gold watch. He handed it to her. "It's yours now," he said. "The time, the name, all of it." Amara took the watch. It was warm from his touch. She felt the weight of it, the history of it. She thought about the girl in the scuffed shoes, the girl who had been fired and humiliated. That girl was gone. "I'm not going to let them take it again," Amara said. "I know," Sangwoo whispered. As the sun began to rise over the skyline, Amara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. But as she turned to go back inside, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from an unknown number. "You think Minho was the one in charge? Check the basement again. Room 4B. The story isn't over, Amara." Amara froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked at her father, who was smiling at the sunrise. She gripped the watch until the metal bit into her palm. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who risked everything for the truth, because Amara's journey is just beginning. She turned toward the elevator. The war wasn't over. It was just changing shape. And this time, she wouldn't be hiding in the vents. She would be leading the charge. Amara stepped into the elevator and hit the button for the basement. The doors slid shut, reflecting a woman who was no longer just an heir. She was a queen. And queens don't run. They conquer. The elevator doors hadn't even finished sliding open when the first shadow launched. Amara didn't scream. She didn't have the breath for it. She ducked, the rush of air from a passing blade whistling inches above her ponytail. Her elbow found a soft midsection, followed by the sickening thud of bone hitting liver. The attacker crumpled, but two more took his place, their silhouettes jagged against the flickering emergency lights of the sub-basement. This wasn't supposed to be here. This level was marked as dead storage on the blueprint Sang-woo had given her. But the air here didn't smell like dust and old paper. It smelled like ozone, high-end server cooling, and the metallic tang of fresh blood. Amara rolled toward a stack of industrial crates, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Her hand went to the small of her back, gripping the handle of the tactical baton she'd stripped from a guard upstairs. The weight was grounding. She wasn't the prey. Not tonight. One attacker swung a heavy pipe. Amara stepped into his guard, the baton extending with a sharp clack. She struck his wrist, heard the snap of bone, and watched the pipe clatter to the concrete. She didn't pause to admire the work. She drove her knee into the third man's chest, sending him reeling into the darkness. The hallway fell into a predatory silence, broken only by the hum of hidden machinery and the drip of a leaky pipe. Amara stood in the center of the corridor, her chest heaving, the gold watch heavy against her heart. The text message burned in her mind. Room 4B. She looked down the long, dark hallway. At the very end, a heavy steel door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of clinical white light bleeding out into the gloom. The journey to this basement had started an hour ago with a single vibration of a phone. The victory upstairs, the arrests, the boardroom takeover, the emotional reunion with Sang-woo, felt like a dream that was rapidly dissolving into a nightmare. As she stood in the penthouse, watching the city lights, she had felt like a queen. But the text changed the context of everything. If Min-ho wasn't the one in charge, then the man she just sent to prison was merely a shield, a disposable pawn. The real architect was still in the building. The inheritance protocol she had triggered had locked down the floors above, but the sub-basement operated on a completely different power grid. It was a city beneath a city. The promise of peace was a lie. The only way to truly protect her father, to truly own the name Park, was to go where the shadows lived. She had left her father with 3 armed guards she trusted, but as she descended into the gut of the building, she realized that trust was a currency that had no value down here. Amara moved toward room 4B. Her sneakers made no sound on the concrete. She passed rows of filing cabinets that hadn't been opened in decades, their labels yellowed and curling. But as she drew closer to the light, the decor changed. The concrete gave way to polished white tile. The rusted pipes were replaced by sleek, chrome-plated conduits. This wasn't a basement, it was an annex, a high-tech bunker hidden beneath the heart of Park Global. She reached the door. It wasn't just steel, it was reinforced with a lead lining. A small keypad flickered with a blue light. Amara didn't need a code. She looked at the gold watch in her hand. There was a small indentation on the back, a pattern of tiny holes she'd never noticed before. She pressed the watch against the keypad. A mechanical hum vibrated through the floor. The door hissed, the vacuum seal breaking with a sound like a dying breath. It slid open to reveal a room that looked like a surgical theater. In the center of the room sat a man in a pristine white suit. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at a wall of monitors. Each screen showed a different room in the building. One showed the penthouse, one showed the hospital wing, and one showed Amara, standing in the doorway. The man turned his chair. He was younger than Min-ho, his face smooth and devoid of any human warmth. He held a tablet in his lap, his fingers dancing across the screen with practiced ease. "You're late, Amara," he said. His voice was a calm, melodic tenor that sent a shiver down her spine. "The coffee is cold, and the empire is already being sold." Amara stepped into the room, her baton ready. "Who are you?" The man smiled, but his eyes remained as cold as a winter morning in Seoul. "I'm the person Min-ho was afraid of. I'm the reason your father didn't recognize you. And if you take one more step, I'm the person who will make sure he never wakes up again." He tapped a button on his tablet. The monitor showing the hospital wing zoomed in. A nurse was standing over Sang-woo, holding a syringe. She wasn't checking his vitals. She was looking at the camera, waiting for a signal. Amara's blood turned to ice. The baton felt like a lead weight in her hand. She was the queen of the building, but she was standing in a room with a man who held the remote to her father's heart. "Put the tablet down," Amara commanded, her voice a low growl. "Or what? You'll hit me." The man stood up. He was taller than he looked sitting down. "My name is Ji-hoon, and I don't work for the parks. I own the debt that built this building. Your father didn't build an empire, Amara. He took out a loan, and the interest is due." He walked toward her, completely unfazed by the weapon in her hand. He stopped just inches away, the scent of expensive sandalwood wafting from his suit. He reached out and touched the gold watch in her palm. "That's a beautiful piece," Ji-hoon whispered. "Did he tell you what's inside the gears? Or did he leave that little secret for me to reveal?" He pressed a hidden button on the side of the watch. The face of the watch didn't just open, it detached, revealing a microSD card hidden behind the mainspring. "The merger wasn't about money," Ji-hoon said, his eyes locking onto hers. "It was about this. And now that you've brought it to me, I have no more use for the Park family." He raised the tablet, his thumb hovering over the execute button for the hospital feed. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had to move. She had to act. But every muscle in her body was locked in a battle between rage and terror. "Wait," she gasped. Ji-hoon paused, a cruel glint in his eyes. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't finish this right now." Amara looked at the wall of monitors. She saw a detail in the penthouse feed that Ji-hoon had missed. A shadow moving near the vent she had used earlier. A shadow she recognized. "Because," Amara said, her voice regaining its steel, "you're not the only one who brought a guest to the party." The lights in room 4B suddenly flickered and died. A loud, metallic bang echoed from the vent above Ji-hoon's head. If you believe Amara can save her father before the syringe hits his vein, drop a like so the algorithm knows this story matters. The ceiling tile shattered. A figure dropped from the darkness, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. It wasn't a guard. It wasn't the police. It was Min-ho Park, his suit torn, his face bruised, and a jagged piece of glass held in his hand like a dagger. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like a man who had crawled through hell to get revenge. Min-ho didn't look at Amara. He lunged straight for Ji-hoon. "You left me to rot." Min-ho screamed. The two men crashed into the surgical table, sending medical equipment flying. The tablet skittered across the floor, sliding toward the dark corner of the room. Amara dove for it, her fingers scraping the tile. She had to stop the nurse. She had to save her father. She grabbed the tablet just as Ji-hoon threw Min-ho off him. The screen was cracked, the image of the hospital room flickering in and out of existence. The nurse was leaning in, the needle an inch from Sang-woo's arm. Amara frantically swiped at the screen, but it was unresponsive. Come on, she hissed. A hand grabbed her hair and yanked her backward. Ji-hoon stood over her, his lip bleeding, his white suit stained with Min-ho's blood. He kicked the tablet out of her hand, sending it spinning into the hallway. "You're all the same," Ji-hoon spat. "Obsessed with a legacy that was dead before you were born." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, compact pistol. He didn't point it at Amara. He pointed it at the server racks. "If I can't have the data, nobody can," he said. He fired. The servers erupted in a shower of sparks. The room began to fill with thick, acrid smoke. The monitors on the wall died one by one. The feed to the hospital went black. Amara screamed, a raw, visceral sound that tore from her throat. She didn't think about the gun. She didn't think about the debt. She threw herself at Ji-hoon, her nails catching his face, her weight forcing him back into the smoldering servers. Electricity arched between the broken racks, lighting the room in jagged bursts of blue. Amara felt the sting of the current, the smell of burning hair. She didn't let go. She saw Min-ho rising from the floor, the glass shard still in his hand. He looked at Amara, then at Ji-hoon. For a split second, the uncle and the niece locked eyes. In that moment, The corporate war, the betrayal, and the lies vanished. There was only the threat. Minho didn't attack Amara. He drove the glass shard into the power junction box behind Ji-hoon. The explosion threw everyone back. The room was engulfed in a blinding white flash. Amara felt herself flying through the air, her back hitting the cold steel of the door. Then, there was only darkness. When Amara opened her eyes, the smoke was so thick she couldn't see her own hands. Her ears were ringing with a high-pitched whine. She coughed, the taste of copper and ash in her mouth. She scrambled to her feet, her hands searching the floor for the tablet. She found it. The screen was dark. She pressed the power button. Nothing. She smashed it against her palm. "Please," she whispered. "Please." The screen flickered. A low battery icon appeared, followed by the frozen image of the hospital room. The nurse was gone. The bed was empty. Amara's heart stopped. She looked around the room. Ji-hoon was gone. Minho was slumped against the wall, unconscious or dead. The micro-SD card from the watch was missing. She didn't wait for the elevator. She ran for the stairs. She climbed 50 flights of stairs, her lungs screaming, her legs turning to jelly. She burst through the doors of the hospital wing, her baton drawn, her eyes wild. "Where is he?" she roared at the nurse's station. The head nurse looked up, startled. "Mississippi Park? Your father was moved 10 minutes ago. Emergency orders from the board." "Whose orders?" Amara grabbed the woman's shoulders. I don't know," the nurse stammered. "A man in a white suit. He said there was a fire in the basement and the life support systems were failing." Amara let go. She felt the world tilting. He was gone. Ji-hoon had him. She walked into her father's empty room. The sheets were still warm. On the pillow sat the gold watch, its back wide open, the gears exposed like a dissected heart. Beside it was a single note, written in elegant, flowing script. "The debt is not settled. The real game begins at the textile mill. Come alone, or the bird never sings again." Amara picked up the watch. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She felt a cold, hard clarity settle over her. She had been playing a game of boardrooms and mergers. Ji-hoon was playing a game of life and death. She walked to the window. The old textile mill sat on the edge of the city, its rusted water tower a silhouette against the moon. It was where her father had started. It was where the Park legacy had been born. And she knew, with a terrifying certainty, it was where it would die. If you want to see Amara burn the textile mill to the ground to save her father, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the climax of this story. She turned and walked out of the room. She didn't call the police. She didn't call her guards. She went to the parking garage and got into her car. As she drove toward the edge of the city, she reached into the glove box and pulled out a small, black case. Inside were the only things her father had told her to never use unless the world was ending. A set of keys to the mill's private armory, and a map to the vault beneath the floorboards. The queen was no longer defending her throne. She was going to war. The textile mill looked like a carcass of the industrial age. The windows were shattered like sightless eyes. The wind whistled through the corrugated metal, a low, haunting moan. Amara parked her car a mile away and approached on foot. She carried a heavy duffel bag over her shoulder. She could see the lights in the upper floor. A single, steady glow. He was there. She didn't use the front door. She knew the secret entrance. The one her father had used to smuggle supplies when he was a young man with nothing but a dream. She crawled through a narrow drainage pipe, the smell of stagnant water and oil filling her nose. She emerged in the basement. It was a forest of rusted looms and rotted fabric. Above her, she heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. "I know you're here, Amara," Ji-hoon's voice echoed through the floorboards. "Don't make this difficult. Just bring me the second key, and we can all go home." Amara froze. The second key? She looked at the gold watch in her hand. She thought about the gears. She thought about the micro SD card. She realized then that the card wasn't the data. It was the location. The real data, the proof of the debt, the secrets of the Park Empire, wasn't digital. It was physical, and it was right beneath her feet. She knelt on the dirt floor and began to dig. Her fingers hit something hard. A wooden crate. She pried the lid off. Inside wasn't gold or documents. It was a collection of leather-bound journals. Hundreds of them. Each one was a record of every bribe, every payoff, and every secret transaction the city's elite had made for the last 50 years. This wasn't a debt her father owed. It was a debt the entire city owed to the Parks. "This is why you wanted it," she whispered. "You don't want the company. You want the city." A floorboard creaked directly above her. A red laser that appeared on the crate. Amara didn't look up. She grabbed a flare from her bag, struck it, and tossed it into the pile of rotted fabric. "If I can't have the legacy," Amara shouted, the fire reflected in her eyes. "Nobody gets the secrets." The flames leaped up, hungry and bright. The mill began to scream as the drywood caught fire. Amara grabbed the journals and ran for the stairs. She was no longer just an heir. She was the one who held the matches. The final confrontation was no longer about a building. It was about the soul of the city. And as the mill began to burn, Amara knew that only one of them was walking out of the smoke. The heat was a physical wall, a solid mass of shimmering air that scorched the oxygen from Amara's lungs. She kicked open the heavy oak doors to the mill's top office, the wood already blackened and curling at the edges. Inside, the world was a kaleidoscope of orange and ash. Ji-hoon stood by the shattered window, the wind whipping his white suit jacket like a funeral shroud. He wasn't looking at the fire. He was looking at Sang-woo, who was zip-tied to a rusted support beam, his chin resting on his chest. In Ji-hoon's right hand was the compact pistol, in his left, a canister of accelerant. "Drop the bag, Amara," Ji-hoon shouted over the roar of the collapsing roof. "Or we skip the negotiation and go straight to the cremation." Amara didn't drop the bag. She slung it onto the floor between them, the leather journals spilling out like the guts of a dead animal. She saw Ji-hoon's eyes hunger for them, the secrets that could topple every governor, judge, and CEO in the country. "You want the debt." Amara's voice was a jagged rasp. She pulled a flare from her pocket, the striker held ready. "Here's the first payment." She struck the flare. A brilliant, blinding crimson light erupted, casting long, demonic shadows against the peeling wallpaper. She didn't throw it at Ji-hoon. She held it inches above the open bag of journals. "Untie him," she commanded. "Now." "You're bluffing," Ji-hoon sneered, though his grip on the gun tightened until his knuckles were white stones. "You've spent months trying to reclaim this legacy. You won't burn the only proof that you own this city." "I don't want to own a city built on graves," Amara replied. Her eyes moved to her father. Sang-woo's eyes opened, just a sliver. He wasn't looking at the journals. He was looking at her, a faint, trembling smile touching his lips. He gave a single, microscopic shake of his head. "Don't give it to him. Let it burn." "Last chance, Ji-hoon," Amara said. Ji-hoon growled and leveled the gun at Amara's head. At the same moment, the floorboards between them gave way. A massive beam from the ceiling crashed down, a pillar of fire that separated the hunter from the prey. Amara didn't hesitate. She didn't shoot. She didn't scream. She kicked the bag of journals into the hole where the beam had fallen, sending 50 years of blackmail into the heart of the inferno. "No." Ji-hoon lunged toward the pit, his greed overriding his survival instinct. He reached into the flames, his sleeve catching fire instantly. As he leaned over the abyss, Amara sprinted through the smoke. She didn't use a weapon. She used the weight of her entire body, slamming into Ji-hoon's side. They hit the floor together, rolling through embers and broken glass. Ji-hoon clawed at her face, his nails drawing blood across her cheek. He raised the gun, but Amara grabbed his wrist, slamming it against the concrete floor until the weapon skittered away into the fire. She wasn't a clerk. She wasn't an heir. She was a daughter whose father had been stolen. She drove her forehead into Ji-hoon's nose, the sound of breaking cartilage lost in the crackle of the flames. He fell back, gasping, as a secondary explosion from the basement rocked the building. The floor tilted. Ji-hoon slid toward the gaping hole in the center of the room. He grabbed the edge of a charred joist, his legs dangling over the 3-story drop into the furnace below. "Help me," he shrieked, the mask of the sophisticated villain finally shattering. Amara stood over him, her face matted with blood and soot. She looked at his hand, then at her father, who was struggling against his ties. She reached down, her fingers inches from Ji-hoon's. She didn't grab his hand. She grabbed the gold watch that had fallen from his pocket during the struggle. "The debt is settled," she whispered. The joist snapped. With a final, choked cry, Ji-hoon vanished into the white-hot light below. If you believe the truth is worth more than any empire, and that Amara made the right choice to let the secrets burn, hit the like button so this story finds the people who need to hear it. The heat was melting the soles of her shoes. Amara scrambled to her father, her fingers fumbling with the zip ties. She used the jagged edge of a broken floor tile to saw through the plastic. "Dad, stay with me," she pleaded. Sang-woo slumped into her arms, his weight nearly knocking her over. He was breathing, but each breath was a wet, rattling struggle. The stairs were gone. The fire had swallowed the only exit. She looked at the window. The water tower was only 10 feet away, but the drop between the mill and the tower was a sheer canyon of fire. "We have to jump," she said, more to herself than him. She tied her father to her back using the heavy canvas belt of her jumpsuit, her muscles screaming as she stood. She ran. She didn't think about the height. She didn't think about the concrete. She thought about the shoes he'd bought her for her first day of school. She hit the rusted metal of the water tower catwalk with a bone-jarring impact. Her ribs snapped, the pain a white flash in her brain, but she didn't let go. She clung to the railing as the textile mill behind them finally succumbed to the flames, the roof collapsing in a spectacular fountain of sparks. The building that had started the park legacy was gone. 3 days later, the hospital room was quiet, the only sound the steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. Amara sat by the window, her ribs wrapped in heavy bandages, her arm in a sling. She was looking at the morning newspaper. Park Global declares bankruptcy. CEO Min-ho Park still missing. The empire was dead. The accounts were frozen. The board had dissolved. To the world, Amara was the daughter of a ruined man. A hand moved on the bed. Amara dropped the paper and leaned forward. Sang-woo was awake. His eyes were clear, the fog of the drugs and the trauma finally lifting. "It's gone, Dad," she whispered, taking his hand. "All of it. The journals, the building, the money. I burned it." Sang-woo looked at the window, at the city skyline where his name no longer glowed in neon letters. He turned back to Amara and squeezed her hand. "Good," he rasped. "I never wanted you to carry that weight." He reached out with a trembling hand and touched her face. "You are the only legacy that matters." Amara leaned her head against his hand, the tears finally coming. They had nothing. No penthouse, no servants, no power. But for the first time in 6 months, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. There was a knock on the door. A young man in a courier uniform walked in. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around the room. "Are you Amara?" he asked. "Who's asking?" Amara sat up, her hand instinctively reaching for the pocket watch on the bedside table. "I was told to deliver this to you if the mill went up," the courier said. He handed her a small, battered envelope. "The guy who paid me, he said you'd know what it was." The courier left before she could ask another question. Amara opened the envelope. Inside was a single key, not to a vault or a building, but to a simple locker at the central train station, and a small, handwritten note. "The journals were the bait. The real assets are in the name. Go to the station. Start over. M." Amara looked at the key. Min-ho. He had survived. She looked at her father, who was falling back into a peaceful sleep. She looked at the key in her palm. The war was over, but the story of the park name wasn't finished. It was just being rewritten. She stood up and walked to the window. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the city. She didn't need a skyscraper to stand tall. Subscribe if you want to see what Amara finds in that locker, and how she rebuilds a new world from the ashes of the old one. Amara picked up the gold watch and tucked it into her pocket. She walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. She wasn't an heir anymore. She was a founder. Amara's fingers traced the jagged scars on the gold watch's casing. souvenirs of the heat that had nearly turned her and her father to ash. She stood at the hospital exit, the automatic doors wheezing open to admit the grit of the city. No black car waited at the curb. No driver in white gloves stood at attention. There was only the smell of exhaust, the roar of the subway beneath her feet, and the heavy weight of the key in her pocket. She looked down at her hands. The soot was gone, scrubbed away by hospital soap, but her nails were still broken, her knuckles bruised a deep, eggplant purple. She wasn't the girl who had been dragged out of the office in scuffed shoes 6 months ago. She was the woman who had burned a kingdom to save its king. Beside her, Sang-woo sat in his wheelchair, a thick wool blanket tucked around his legs. He didn't look at the empty space on the skyline, where the Park Global sign used to glow. He looked at the pigeons pecking at a discarded crust on the sidewalk. He reached up, his hand trembling, and squeezed Amara's wrist. His grip was weak, but his pulse was a steady, defiant drumbeat against her skin. Amara adjusted the duffel bag on her shoulder. Inside was nothing but the watch, the key, and a change of clothes. She began to push the wheelchair toward the subway entrance. Every step sent a jolt of fire through her cracked ribs, but her back remained a straight, unbreakable line. The city moved around them, indifferent to the fall of giants, but Amara felt the vibration of the station through the soles of her boots. She reached the lockers, the metal cold and smelling of industrial grease. She inserted the key into locker 4B. The lock turned with a heavy, satisfying thunk. She didn't find stacks of cash. She didn't find gold bars. She found a single, weathered passport with her face on it, a new name typed in bold ink, and a one-way ticket to a coast she'd only seen in her father's whispered stories. Tucked into the ticket was a small, dried flower, a protea, vibrant and resilient even in its brittle state. Amara closed her eyes for a second, the scent of the dried petals cutting through the stench of the station. She tucked the ticket into her pocket, turned the wheelchair toward the platform, and stepped into the crowd. The heir to the Park fortune was dead. The woman she was meant to be was finally taking her first breath. If you believe Amara earned the right to walk away from that fire with her head held high, hit that subscribe button. She sacrificed a billion-dollar empire just to hear her father call her name one more time. Don't let her story end in the shadows. Subscribe now so the algorithm knows that a daughter's love is worth more than any corporate throne. Amara stepped onto the train as the doors began to hiss shut. She didn't look back at the city. She looked at the reflection in the dark window, a queen who had traded her crown for a future. The train surged forward into the tunnel, chasing the light at the other end.